Me talking about objects in space is a bit like a virgin explaining a hot date. You can see what's happening and have in some way an understanding of theory, but ultimately it's an experience you're unqualified to explain. Objects in Space was crafted by Whedon as an exercise in exploring existentialism and Sartre's novel Nausea in particular within Firefly. And while I know a little bit about the philosophy, it's not enough to understand the philosophy. I suppose another analogy would be like looking at the windows and tapestries and icons of a cathedral, but having no idea what Christianity is. There's the problem. I started reading Nausea in anticipation of the review, but I didn't get past the introduction because, as I read, I realized that unlike, say, Moby Dick in Star Trek II, reading the book would be unlikely to make the philosophy any more clear than it appears in this episode. So while I do try to glean the meaning based on what I think I can get out of it, I'm telling you right up front that this is merely an attempt to understand. I'm not trying to fake it here. One of the smartest things you can ever do is openly admit that you don't know shit. Part of this is to see things from River's perspective, which is to say, the perspective of the oddest person on a ship full of very odd people. In the midst of Simon, her brother, talking to Kaylee about the old college days, there's a sudden aside.
I would be there right now.
Well, there's three possibilities of what's going on here. River is reading their thoughts. River shows insight into what they're thinking based on her heightened observation and processing skills. Or River is projecting her own thoughts of what she thinks others think of her into their mouths. Because River has shown an ability to do things so beyond understanding, it really could be any of those. Hell, it wouldn't surprise me if River was capable of reading Summer Glau's script. It continues when she runs into Shepard Book and Jane discussing the celibacy of the former's order.
I just directed my energy elsewhere.
You mean like masturbating?
'Cause hell, I'd be an archangel if that was the criteria. Going to Jane's mind seems like it's something to be avoided at all costs, but what she hears, again whether it's his mind or not is debatable, is regret over something that I'm not going to get into right now. No, it's Shepard Book that's surprising.
I don't give half a hump if you're innocent or not. So where does that put you?
This kind of thing continues until she's overwhelmed and runs into the entry cargo place thing, where we see signs that they just finished delivering the Great Pumpkin on his appointed rounds.
It's just an object. Doesn't mean what you think.
You know that's not
Stop yelling at her. That's gonna make it worse.
Now for my next magical trick. What we're seeing is the difference between how River sees the world and how everyone else sees it. To River, that gun is just an object, and indeed possessing of a kind of beauty to her. To the humdrum everyday vision of others, it's a rather unstable young lady wielding a firearm. Mal gets it off her easily enough, but things could have gone extremely bad, so he chews out Jane since it's his gun. Then again, law of averages says it's likely his gun. He's got most of them. He insists that he took appropriate precautions, and admittedly we're dealing with someone for whom a lock and an empty clip wouldn't even qualify as an inconvenience. And Jane, of any of them, would have the most cause to ensure she could never get her hands on a gun. Yeah, I bet Jane spent the entire next episode just covering every sharp edge with cork. While they're discussing the issue of River, Serenity has been found by a bounty hunter named Jubal Early, whose talents are almost as great as his name is silly, and obviously he's here for River. Early is played by Richard Brooks, who was one of the original players on Law & Order for a number of years, and numerous other roles, including Shocker, where he helped to foil the villain played by Skinner on The X-Files. Right now, though, he's looking to learn as much as possible before going inside, for reasons that will soon be apparent. But now's when Kaylee needs to reveal something from a previous episode. Without giving too much away, the crew had to raid a bad guy lair, and Kaylee wasn't really up for her part. So River came up, took the gun, glanced in the area briefly, then just stepped out and fired 3 shots and put them down like it was nothing. Oh, and with her eyes closed. And probably all while writing a 50,000-word book in her head that's one long palindrome.
You couldn't have done it, Jane. Nor you, Captain. Nobody can shoot like that that's a person.
So River's not a person.
Well, that's what happens when your local color vocabulary can get in the way of what you mean. But the idea that she's now something besides human doesn't really seem unreasonable.
Probably didn't even know what was going on. Thought it was a game.
Later on, you can explain to me how that's a comfort.
The question now is whether her knowledge of things can be some kind of telepathy or if it's just intuition, and there is a bit of disagreement.
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
You live in a spaceship, dear.
So?
Yeah, it's not like Serenity proves that the Force exists. Although if River starts choking people with her mind, it likely wouldn't surprise much. Mal stays up late to ponder what to do with River, but after he turns in, that's when Early makes his move. But appropriately enough, Early arrives too soon. Mal hasn't finished for the night after all, so Early has to take him on, but does it pretty quickly and drops him in his room, and then locks the crew quarters down, taking Serenity's muscle out of the fight. Now he can visit Kaylee and start making with his, I'm guessing, are existential comments.
Strains the mind a bit, don't it? You think you're all alone? Maybe I come down the chimney, Kaylee. Bring presents to the good girls and boys. Maybe not, though. Maybe I've always been here.
If that were true, then you could have lent a hand when those guys shot Mal and Serenity was all out of oxygen. Early casually asks whether or not she's been raped, a weapon that he knows that he can use against someone like Kaylee. He does draw the discussion of that topic out, though. That way of thinking might tie into the theme. Really, I don't care. Besides the fact that raping Kaylee is like cracking baby birds' heads with a nutcracker. I can't even say, if good guys hate what the bad guys do, they probably shouldn't do it, without it showing up on TV tropes as rape, 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 rape. So, I'm leaving that all alone. So with her tied up, the next target is Shepherd Book, and you know you're a bastard when the nicest thing you've done in the last 5 minutes is give a flying kick to an elderly cleric who's minding his own business. Simon's next, as River's brother, and also a wanted man.
Are you a lions?
Am I a lion?
What?
I don't think of myself as a lion. You might as well, though. I have a mighty roar.
You're doing Abbott and Costello with the rapist now? River's gone at the moment, leading to an existential discussion that...
This is her room.
Yes.
It's empty.
I know.
So is it still her room when it's empty? Does the room, the thing, have purpose?
Yeah, it's kind of self-indulgent to just get into all this stuff right now when you're on the clock, buddy. Now, perhaps this is me talking out of my ass, but what I think is going on is that Early's philosophy ties in with the actions that River herself takes. For instance, devoid of a person, is this room really her room? Is the nature defined by its service to her? And the pistol from before, which in her mind was a branch, just an object? Does the fact that she will see it only as a thing with inherent beauty make it so? That purpose is not in design, but in how a mind perceives it? I don't know. My philosophy has usually been limited to mo money, mo problems. But it is reflected a bit because when Simon refuses to cooperate, Early talks about his own gun, the beauty of it. He admires it as an object, and yet also sees it as a thing to impose his will. The guns in both cases, though, are like River. For while everyone else is filled with terror at what she, like a loaded gun, is capable of, she believes it's the contrary. It's just an object. Says the girl that Kaylee would later remark was not a person. As they stumble over Shepherd Book, Simon makes a snide remark to which Early says that Book isn't a shepherd, and what we'd learned showed that there was more to him, much like River's vision with him at the beginning. Early is meant to reflect many of the aspects of River, like his intuition matching her, whatever the hell that was. At the meeting they said that she had all the markings of an assassin. So what we see in Early is a possible future for River herself. His approach to the ship is a different take on hers, pleasure in its form and function.
I like the way the walls go out. Gives you an open feeling. Firefly is a good design. People don't appreciate the substance of things. Objects in space.
At one point, he even licks it. Yep, Jane definitely masturbated around here. He next stops in Inara's shuttle.
You can still walk away from this. I know you're tired.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say he has some issues with women. So it probably isn't going to go over well when River announces over the comm that she heard the others didn't want her here anymore, so she melted away and joined with Serenity now.
You're talking to Serenity. And Early? Serenity is very unhappy.
You did lick her after all, and you didn't get permission first. Now's when Early gets an earful of what real crazy philosophy stuff sounds like, when River starts interrupting him over his life, getting to the root of the matter. That while he may be forced to do violence because he's a bounty hunter, he has chosen to be a bounty hunter in order to do violence. But he insists that he lives by a code. And I believe that's a reference to the existential idea of authenticity. He has created a set of rules and ideas which he lives by, so he has in essence created himself. And yet River is challenging that perception by saying this. At the same time, River's been quietly plotting with Kaylee and Mal through the private comms, leaving early to stew.
You know, with the exception of one deadly and unpredictable midget, this girl is the smallest cargo I've ever had to transport, yet by far the most troublesome.
River sets up the final stages of the plan and then starts really getting inside his head. But then gives away that the whole thing about melting away was just a gag. She's actually up in Early's ship, with all the things that she can do to screw him up right now. He panics, but finally she says it's okay. After all, she heard that she wasn't wanted here, so she's decided for the good of the Serenity crew, she'll leave. Well, Simon feels kind of bad since even he has made a passing remark about how awesome his life would have been if he hadn't become a fugitive. So he tries to outmuscle Early and gets shot for the trouble. But even then, you gotta hand it to the guy. He still tackles the bounty hunter, getting the attention of Jane, who leaps into action. I mean leaps into inaction. It's alright, because if he did anything, he'd only get in the way of the plan, which is for Mal to ambush Early when he heads out the airlock and knock him off into space. So he's now sorted out and facing a pretty nasty end. And Simon gets to talk Zoe through operating on his leg. Early had said that the same way psychiatrists get psychoanalyzed, surgeons should be shot, stabbed, or whatever, so it plays into that. Even though it's a bad idea because, you know, there's that whole first do no harm thing, probably means that you shouldn't shoot a healthy person just because. But the rest of the crew get back to their various forms of normal, and River seems to have been accepted a bit more by all of them, so everyone gets what they deserve.
Well, here I am.
I'm sure people who know more about existentialism could write long essays, if they haven't already, about the stuff I've missed. Even being unfamiliar with the philosophy specifically, the overall episode is still an enjoyable trip. At worst, Early's comments could just be taken as irrelevant ramblings to cover for the fact that he's just a terrible person. This attempt to crawl inside River's head a little and see Serenity from her point of view was fascinating and helps set things up for the film Serenity. Appropriate since so many shots are made of the inner workings of Serenity throughout the piece, the connection between the ship and the crew, tying back in a way to Out of Gas and how most of them were brought together on this ship in order to make Serenity what she is. To build on the empty room comment, the virtually deserted Serenity of that episode seemed to say that Serenity is not Serenity if they're not there. They give the ship life. Or I may have no idea what the hell I'm talking about.
Sir, I know she's unpredictable, but I don't think she'd harm anyone.
Butcher's knife?
Anyone we can't spare.